Blog Talk Radio.
Our people are very serious about not being very serious.
Our people are very serious
genocide.
about not being
genocide.
very serious.
Very serious white people
about not being very serious.
Genocide. Our people are very serious about
Genocide.
Context of white supremacy. Gus T. Renegade and Justice in for another program to share constructive information on racism, white supremacy, what it is, and how it works. I want to start the program with a brief paragraph from one of the books that our guest for today's program authored. He writes, "Black people are therefore not emotionally or psychologically capable of helping one another determine what is really valuable, moral, truthful, or meaningful relative to the quest for freedom from under white world terror domination, because our view is skewed. In a way, our lack of having proper context can be compared to lack of gravity. And like gravity, context helps to keep one in the proper orbit and grounded in reality, relative to everything else within and outside the orbit. Without the proper context that can be obtained in part by relevant reading, Black people are found all over the place, doing whatever we feel like, whenever we feel like doing it. However, what we are really doing is supporting the system of white world terror domination." That is from the book titled The Last Book by our guest for today's program. Real pleasure to have him on the broadcast. He is a community parent, an activist, organizer, an educator, and he co-manages Blacknificent Books and More with his wife. He also founder of the Benue Cultural Center. He has authored a plethora of essays and books. Some of the books that he has written, Black Guerrilla Warfare in America, Tips on Quick and Easy Ways Africans Can Commit Subtle Suicide. He has also authored You Should Be Ashamed of Your Nice But Duped Parents. We're going to talk about some of his writings as well as his views on the system of white supremacy, white domination. Real pleasure to have him on the program for hopefully a very serious discussion. Our guest, Dr. Kamau Kambon. Dr. Kambon, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Brother, can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. I greet you with the words Black liberation.
Wow, outstanding. We are, as I said, just really honored to have you on the program. So many listeners the sound. I told you we've been playing the sound clip of you saying black people are very serious about not being very serious.
Right.
We've been playing that for about a year, and it really has hit home with a lot of people and just kind of keeping them focused on how we should be behaving as long as this system of white domination exists.
Right.
I know a lot of my listeners, they have not heard too much information from you directly. So if you'd like to take some time to kind of let them know a little bit more about who you are and how you arrived at some of your conclusions about what we should do about this problem of white people.
Okay, that's beautiful. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you in particular. You and I have spoken a number of times, and pleased to be connected with you because you seem to be a brother who does not skip a beat. There seems to be very few gaps in your conceptual understanding of what is going on, and I deeply appreciate that. I noticed over the years that young brothers and sisters, basically between the ages of 28 and 34, in my estimation, hold the real hope for our liberation. I say that because those between the ages of 28, sometimes it'll drop to 26, but primarily 28 to 34, they are the ones that are now asking questions. They have regained curiosity. They have regained vision and eyesight, and they can now hear, and they're asking questions. And I think that my book, You Should Be Ashamed of Your Nice but Duped Parents, illustrates that. I think that those are teenagers, 14, 15, and 16, up to 19, 20. They are basically under white lockdown, meaning they are so tied up with sneakers and partying and chasing girls or girls chasing boys and music, and that they have no idea of what is going on. And those who are 37, 38, 39, they're in the gray area. They still have a chance to be open to what I call correct life-saving information. Those 40 and over, a vast majority of them, not all, but a vast majority of them are psychologically finished. So I'll go back to my background. I went to school. I had a chance to go to school, but I grew up in a city, and I had a great childhood. I mean, I actually was a child. You know, most of our young people don't have a chance to be children, but I had a superlative childhood. And but as I got older, I had what I call episodic moments where something will happen. I think we all have these episodic moments, but some of us are not able to anchor these moments to something, to a larger ideology. And one of the anchor moments I had was I saw two policemen, I was about 9 or 10, dragging a brother, we call them winos. Each white cop had this brother by the arm, and his head was facing the direction they were walking in. His feet were behind them, and they dragged this brother across the street from where they were in front of me. It was in the summertime, and I looked around to see if anybody else was watching this unfold. And it was probably like late morning, early afternoon. I couldn't see anyone watching this. And these two white cops, they ignored me because I was a child. And they proceeded to beat this brother with these nightsticks. And they, just left him in this lot. And this registered in my mind. I put it in my memory bank. And then, other things happened, but it was not until I got into my 20s when I started, I went away to school and came back, and I was asking about my friends, and I found out that this one was in Vietnam, another one was strung out. I had a brother that we all admired. He wound up getting strung out on heroin, and he was found sitting on the toilet with a needle in his arm, and he had overdosed while his two young children were outside in the outer area. And when I heard about that, it just bothered me. And this was like in the late 60s, early 70s. And then I heard other stories, and you can imagine stories. We all have these stories about friends dying, and you never think of someone 19, 20, 25 dying. Nowadays it's not unusual to hear about death, but then it was very startling and unusual. And it wasn't until the late 60s, early 70s that my consciousness really started to percolate. I think that I was always conscious. I always felt like I was just a big pair of eyes because I used to see everything, and everything registered. And I remember going downtown to shop for Christmas, and I'm doing this, I want you to understand, without the benefit of any kind of counseling. And among all of the range of people that I knew, I could say there was not one that was conscious. And I'm talking about hundreds of people. For example, growing up, I never heard one adult say, you should drink water instead of soda, because water is essential. It's a life-sustaining element that we need. So we didn't even have that basic consciousness. So I go downtown and I get off of the bus, and I am astonished at the number of black people who are shopping in these big department stores. And to the point that it made me dizzy. I got on the bus, I went back home, and I announced that I'm not celebrating any more holidays. And I said that because it did not make sense. It did not make sense for people who lived in the conditions that we lived under to go and spend money that we really did not have. And I decided then, at that moment, I'm not celebrating any more holidays. And I was working with some white people, and I made this assertion that, it wasn't a pronouncement. I just said, it's not a big deal. I'm just not celebrating any holiday. I'm not spending money that I don't have. I'm not going into debt to buy gifts. I love the people, but I'm not doing that. And they were calling me Scrooge. It didn't bother me. And then I really loved jazz, and I went to a club one night, and I was leaving the club, and, I didn't party, like most brothers and sisters. And at this time I heard about the death of my friends and the terrible drama that most of them were going through, so I was just hanging by myself. I go to the club, I'm leaving the club. Now, I'm not drinking, I don't mess with drugs or anything like that. So I'm leaving the club. I go to stop, and I get this. I ask for orange juice in one of these little outdoor cafes. And he gives me this little orange juice, and he's going to sell this like 3 ounces for $5. I thought that was outrageous. I said, hey, man. Then and there I decided I'm not spending money in the street anymore. I don't know if it was the same evening or another time. I go into a restaurant, and I look around. I don't see any black people working. I decided I'm not eating in any place where I don't see black people working. Remember, I'm doing this in a vacuum. I don't know about Dr. Ben or Dr. Clark or Elijah Muhammad to any great extent. I had been listening to Malcolm today, and I want to start off by saying that I have the utmost, the highest regard for Malcolm and his brilliance and his ability to understand at a deep, deep level this dynamic in which we live. Today marks 46 years since his assassination, and I pay tribute to him. Last Thursday, February 17th, marked the 10th year since the assassination of Dr. Khalid Abdul Muhammad, the Black Power general. These are two luminaries in the pantheon of those who are now ancestors that we respect and we should always, always, always remember. Ahistorical people are people on the verge of death. So as I went through this experience, I was simultaneously going to school, and I was in the area of education, and education started to loom as a real big issue. I went through a very serious experience working with white people. I mean, very, very serious. When I came to this realization in working with this one particular white man, that this man, and it wasn't anything overt that he did, but I was reading a book entitled Body Language, a little paperback, because I always read, but I really wasn't reading conscious books. So I read this book, Body Language, and I started to understand the deep meaning of nonverbal communication. A couple of things happened, and his nonverbal communication to me was, as a white man, he wants to kill me. That was the message I got. And he was not really directing that message to me. Well, he was, but it spanned beyond me. He wanted to, as a white male, he wanted to kill everyone who was black. Now, I'd say African. And if you go on a Bibi Tumi Kasa, you'll see that linguistically, black and African across the continent are interchangeable terms. Dr. Theophile Obenga and Che Anta Diop's book, The Cultural Unity of Black Africa, explains these unifying principles that bind us together. So you'll hear me say African, that's spelled with a K and not with a C, and black. So they're interchangeable. Dr. Ben has a book entitled Black Man of the Nile. Then he has another book entitled Africa, Mother of Western Civilization. Dr. Clark has a lecture, Black Family Under Siege. He has a book entitled Christopher Columbus and the African Holocaust. So these are our twin towers, Dr. Ben and Dr. Clark. And these are the terms that they use. So someone can come and bring me different correct information, then I will accept that. But until that time, these are the terms that I use. And so this moment got very serious, and I understood that as a man, I said, one thing I learned immediately, I said, wow, this is what it is like to be a black man in America. And I was about 30 at the time. And when I understood that, I immediately changed. I went through a transformation. And it's very interesting. Dr. Amos Wilson gives a lecture, and he talks about Colin Ferguson, the man who got on the Long Island train and killed some white people. Dr. Amos Wilson, whose book, among many, is Blueprint for Black Power, said that Colin Ferguson's self-hatred mechanism broke down. So instead of internalizing oppression and going to alcohol and drugs and other debilitating things, Colin Ferguson externalized his understanding and carried it out. So instead of me, I did not internalize oppression. I knew, okay, you want to kill me, I'm not going to let you kill me. And that's when I started to move in a different direction. Part of this was, as I used to walk through the community and meet brothers that I knew, I would ask the brothers, I said, hey, yo, man, how you doing? And I knew a lot of brothers. And the brother would say, yo, man, I'm all right, but I'm trying to get myself together. And there's a thing about that I perceived. I could tell when a brother was drinking a lot of wine because his lips always looked wet. And the brother would say, yeah, man, I'm trying to get myself together. And I heard this repeatedly from so many brothers. And then I would meet a brother, he would say the same thing, I'm trying to get myself together. And I could see that this brother was smoking reefer. You can look at the fingers, the thumb and the other finger, the forefinger, and you could see them a little yellow, or you could see their teeth yellow from the stain of the joint. And this was in the early 70s, and I finally came to this point. I said, wow, what self is he talking about, or what self are these brothers talking about? And I came up with this idea, which is embedded in Black guerrilla warfare, that we have these different selves: a psychological self, a cultural self, an economic self, an education self, a health self, a spiritual self, a social self. I didn't do much with politics, and there were a couple of others that I'm going to get into later on. So anyway, this was my odyssey into becoming conscious. And when I understood that this white man wanted to kill me, and it didn't matter whether I had on a suit and tie, that was irrelevant. It didn't matter whether I had a title, whether I had a degree, whether I had a big car, whether I had a big house, where I lived. That was all irrelevant. There's a brother, and if you're online, I don't know if you can do this while we talk. There's a brother, his last name was Walker, and I can't remember whether he was in South Carolina or Columbia, Georgia. This was about 5 years ago, I think, and he was coming out of an apartment complex which he did not know was under surveillance by undercover cops. He emerges from this complex with, I think, at least two other friends. They get in the SUV. Immediately as they drive off, the cops surround the car, pull him and his friends out, and within a matter of moments, Kenneth Walker lay dead. The cops shot him. He was the driver of the car. And I think, if I remember correctly, I have this article in one of my books, that there were 10,000 people that came out to his funeral because this was such an egregious execution of a brother. The reason I bring this up is because Kenneth Walker was a brother who had on a suit and tie. He was a Christian. He had a job. He had a wife and a child. He had all of those things that the society says that you should strive to achieve, and he was executed. So when I became conscious, I changed. I decided I was going to change my diet because I understood the medical industry, the hospitals, and what a racket that was. There's a book entitled Racketeering in Medicine. Among other books, there's a book entitled Medicine by Scott Whitaker. Another book, The Medical Mafia. There's a book that everybody should get entitled Survival into the 21st Century by Viktoras Kovinskis. Excellent book, a life-changing book. So I changed my diet. In a short period of time, within like 3 or 4 months, I stopped eating dead animals, commonly known as meat. I moved away from dairy products altogether, sugar. And when you read the books, you'll understand how important this is. I changed my whole psychology. Again, it wasn't until about 20 years later I discovered Dr. Barashango's books, African People and European Holidays, A Mental Genocide. I said, oh, wow, here's somebody else that understands that why should I celebrate a European holiday? I'm not European, but even more important than that, I'm not going to invest in a system that is out to kill me. And then, over time, I decided, along with my mate, that we were going to change. We delivered our children at home without medication, drugs. We didn't deal with vaccines. We don't take flu shots. None of that. Okay, but so that is, and I think in 82 or 83, I wrote the Black Guerrilla Warfare, a People's Manual Manifesto, saying basically the concept was we're at war. And I was compelled to write that book. I did that little book on a typewriter while we were also simultaneously working and building. It was an arduous task to try to do everything that I was doing at the time. But I was possessed to do this. And that's where I introduced the concept of we have these different selves and we have to get our different selves together. And then I wrote the other book, Tips on Quick and Easy Ways Africans Can Commit Subtle Suicide. I'll talk about that tonight. Then I wrote the other book, Food, Health, and You, Why Black People Die So Young. And out of that book, I used to put news articles in my books. And because I have thousands, literally thousands of news articles. When I hit that crescendo, that illuminating moment facing that white guy, it also registered that I had to find out what was going on. There are a couple other incidents happened at around that time. One was the shooting death of a young brother who was 13 years old by a cop. And then in a matter of 2 or 3 weeks, there was another young brother who was shot and killed by a cop, and this little boy was 10 years old. So with the combination of these factors dovetailing, I wanted to know for myself what is going on and how could black people let this slide. And that's when I started collecting articles, reading newspapers, audio taping, videotaping. Like at this point, I've got maybe 1,800 VHS tapes with all kind of information. Anything on planet Earth related to black people, I try to have information on. I was thinking about it today. I was watching an interview about 3 or 4 years ago, and in an Israel, so-called Israeli, a general said that what he does and what he teaches all his troops is to be on alert 24 hours a day. He said, basically, I'm paraphrasing, he said, we do not let anything slide by us because we don't know. That little thing we let slide might be the thing to lead to our demise. And it's interesting, simultaneously, I follow black political prisoners. We have many black political prisoners in the prisons of the United States. The last figure I had was about 150. That includes Louis Peltier, of course, Mumia, Jamil Alamin. Both of these men are languishing in the prisons of the concentration camps of America for crimes they did not commit. We have some brothers and some sisters in prison that have been in prison 35, 36, 40 years. There is a book entitled Buried Alive about what's happening in California and how a lot of these are not political prisoners, but a lot of these prisoners are buried in solitary confinement for 24 hours a day, every day, with no lights in the cell. They don't know what day it is, what time it is. It's really a horrendous situation. So the general makes this comment, and it's interesting. Geronimo Jijaga Pratt was accused of a murder in California called the tennis court murder. And he was in prison, and he says, he's interviewed, and he also says this. He said he went before the parole board, and the parole board said they would release him if he recanted being a revolutionary. He said, I'm not going to recant that. He said, I'm a revolutionary. And they sent him back to prison. There were times, 2 or 3 times, he didn't even go to the parole board. But they knew, not that the parole board knew, but the prosecutor and other attorneys surrounding his case knew that he was innocent. They manufactured this evidence against him. And he was in prison for 18, 19, 20 years, but he was fighting his case. Johnny Cochran got involved. And what happened was Johnny Cochran went through the transcripts. And as he went through the transcripts, he came across one little statement. Julius Butler, you all should know his name. Julius Butler was an FBI informant. But during the course of the testimony, he said he was not connected with the police or the FBI. I don't remember the police or FBI. But he said he was not part of that. But in the transcript, it said Julius Butler, FBI informant. And that little piece of information was the key that led to the release of Jijaga Pratt. The white people, I heard Obama say it last week, the devil is in the details. So tonight I'm going to talk about the macro view, but also I'm illustrating what the general said and this situation with Jijaga. The details are equally important as understanding the overarching view. So that's a little bit. There's more. I wrote other books, Duped Parents, Part 1, Part 2. There's the Declaration, which traces, to a great extent, the genocide against African people from ancient Kemet up until the time I published the book. Then I wrote The Last Black Man Standing as a separate book. It appeared as an article. And a brother called me about 2 or 3 months ago and said he was going through his files and came across that article published in 1999. He said, this is prophetic. He says, really illustrates what's going on now. After The Last Black Man, I wrote the Duped Parents 1, Duped Parents 2, then the Blackest Book, then the Blackest Book Part 2, and then the newest book is Messages from the Ancestors, trapped in the context of white domination. So that's a little bit about that. The other piece I really want to amplify is that I've never been a member of a civic, well, I can't say civic because I was doing community organizing, but I wasn't part of any formal group. But I'm not a member of a fraternal group, not a member of a military group, a social group. I'm not a member of a religious group. I'm not a member of a martial arts group. I'm not a member of any group. And the disclaimer is that what I say tonight has no bearing on the staff and management of COWS, context of white supremacy. These are my views, and I'm not advocating anything. I'm merely reporting. It's like a review of the literature that I have synthesized and I'm reporting to those who are interested. So now, with that, there are other things I want to say about that, but I really want to get into the heart of our discussion. Now, do you have any questions about the background?
Wow. I'm sure listeners will have some questions. I'm satisfied. I'm just eager to hear more about your views, the macro level. I guess if we could get started with what your macro view is of what's happening on the planet. I wanted to give you my definition of white supremacy, and you can let me know if you think this is accurate, and that can kind of start you sharing, what you think is happening. My view, my definition of racism, white supremacy: a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white. Do you think that's an accurate definition for what's happening on the planet?
Yes, I think it is very accurate. I think that there are no gaps in that conceptual framework. Let me go through and let's see if what I have to say coincides with that. And this is what we do. I've created this, based on what I call the eclectic approach. Eclectic means, and when I was teaching, I was teaching in college and I taught educational courses. And I said that I always used to tell students, I'm going to present this theory to you. You may not understand, you may not even like the entire theory, but there might be one little piece of the theory that relates to you, and you take that piece out and you add it to, who you are and what you're doing, and it should be a benefit to you. So I like to use the eclectic approach. That's why I listen to everything. I listen to the news, and I listen to people talk, because every little thing has a spot in the paradigm, that the structure. I see myself as an architect, and I have erected this structure in my mind to understand the world, and that's what we have to do. We have to understand the entire world, not just our little spot in it. And this is why schools take extraordinary measures to, and I'm talking specifically about the white female teacher. She is the number one enemy of the black male, the young boy. And they take strides in crushing the curiosity, the creativity, and the spirit of these children, so that these children will never grow up to read, to ask questions, or to expand their curiosity and implement their creative forces within them. I'm going to talk about, I know that you talk a lot about logic, and I know that logic is important. There is, the second part of this is that there is a lot of ill logic on the planet. That's ILL-LOGIC. There's ill logic. A lot of our people are illogical. And then there is applied logic. It's similar to applied mathematics. We could be in the classroom and doing our times table and 1 + 1 and 3 + 3. That's in the classroom. But then when we go to the market, we buy an item that, and hopefully we're going to a black-owned market. We give the cashier $2 and the item is $1.63. We should be able to calculate what our change is. That's applied mathematics. There's applied science, not just the laboratory, but how does this science apply in the real world? Then there is applied logic. And applied logic means we have come to a conclusion, or we have come to the conclusion. Now that we have arrived at this conclusion, we should be on the brink of discovering what is next. And that's going to be part of what I talk about later on. So I'm going to probably miss some things, but let me begin by this overarching macro, it's actually called the Kambon overarching macro African view of the world. And if you have two pieces of paper and you put them horizontally next to each other, we can go across the page and I can lay out this paradigm. Okay, the first, on the left-hand side, the first overarching domain is genocide. Now, under genocide, there are many aspects. Genocide means that that the world, the globe, is a war zone. The entire globe is a war zone. And it is operated by, we could say whites, but it's whites and a white superimposed mind on others, on other groups. This genocide is a coordinated approach, and it includes governments, corporations, and the mafia. And they're almost indistinguishable because it's interlocking. If you look, this Putin is really in the news about many different things. And I'm going to bring him up again. I lost that thought. And Kosovo are connected to the government is connected to the mafia. And you know, in this country, under who work with the mafia to try to assassinate Castro and other leaders. You want to go and check out the John Perkins and his Confessions of an Economic Hitman and his newest one. I can't think of the title right now, but it's very powerful. But even before John Perkins revealed how this government went out and assassinated world leaders, John Stockwell, a so-called ex-CIA agent, was interviewed by Gil Noble on the flagship station ABC out of New York, and this was like in maybe the 80s, early 90s. Stockwell talked about and laid out this scenario about how the government, when it was dispatched these agents into other countries and assassinated leaders that didn't comply with being puppets. So over the globe then the globe is now a war zone. And under the war zone, this is what I mean, that the white people have made the world, these four things. One, they made the globe an international prison. And by prison, there is a warrant out on, there was one out on Charles Taylor of Liberia when he fled. You know, he murdered a lot of the people. He fled, and they issued this international warrant, arrest warrant on him. There's a warrant on someone else. I can't remember who it is, which shows that this is really an international prison. Now, while I'm thinking about it, I want to say that as black people, we are also in prison. And I'm saying, as part of my conclusion, that we are all in prison. The black woman is in general population, but the black man is in maximum security in this prison. And I think, I can't substantiate this, but I think that it will be a man who will come up with the once and for all solution to the biggest problem on the planet, because the man is under more intense lockdown than the sister, even though we're both in prison. The next under genocide is the world under white domination. And you notice I don't say white supremacy because I never want to subordinate myself psychologically to white people. White people are not supreme. The word supreme connotes something that's positive. John Coltrane, A Love Supreme, the Supreme Singing Group, had all these gold records. They were at the top, but it, to me, conveys something that's positive. And so I don't want to subordinate myself to, psychologically, to, I call them, well, I don't subordinate myself to them. And because they rule by terror and deceit and trickery. That's how they rule. They terrorize everyone on the planet. If you notice, for example, I think it was last week when President Hu met with Obama, it was through his interpreter, he said to the U.S., he said, listen, we are not trying to compete with you militarily. That, yes, we have atomic power or nuclear power, but our goal, basically, is he's saying, we want to neutralize any attack that you might think about launching against us. In other words, he's saying, we're into ourselves, but we have this power. And I remember seeing a piece years ago that when Mao and when China finally got nuclear capability, they showed that the people were in the street crying and celebrating because now they knew that America, that the white people had to back up off of them. This is what détente was about. Russia had what the U.S. had. Malcolm in his speech says, you have to learn how to speak the language that white people speak. He said you can't talk to a man in French, or if he's French and you speak in Chinese, he doesn't understand what you're saying. So Malcolm goes on to say, when the Klan comes up on your porch to get you, and you are speaking the language of the Klan, then basically it's even Steven. So this idea that we don't subordinate ourselves psychologically, and that's why I don't use white supremacy, nor do I, like Alex Jones, he has many tapes. One is The End Game about the Bilderberg. Alex Jones, Anthony Hilder, his tape is 9/11 Illuminati terrorist attack on the World Trade Center. And they, along with others, use the term global elite. Global elite. I never refer to white people as elite because they are not elite. When we think about it, why would I refer to someone that has $1 billion as elite? Because he has money? That's ridiculous. This is a sleazy person, and if he has $1 billion or $1 million, he got his money one of three ways. He exploited people, he exploited land, or he exploited resources. And if you see an old white man with a cane or an old white woman in a wheelchair in the park, look at them and know that they got to be old exploiting African people. And if they didn't directly exploit African people, then they were associated with a person or a corporation that exploited African people. That's how they can retire. So I don't subordinate myself psychologically. They dominate. Yes, they dominate us, but they are not supreme. Okay, so that's the planet is a prison. It's a plantation. The plantation is what the white people do. They were talking about Abraham Lincoln. There's a great book, Forced into Glory, by Lerone Bennett. It took him 10 years to write this book about tracking down the real Abraham Lincoln. But when Lincoln issued the Emancipation, so-called Emancipation Proclamation, what he basically did was he took the boundaries of the plantation and extended them to the entire globe to make all white people dominators of African people. So they made the planet an international plantation. I could elaborate on that later on, but just get the concept. The next thing that under genocide is that the planet is an international cesspool. White people have made the planet a cesspool, meaning, and the best illustration is the Internet. The Internet is a cesspool. It has become a cesspool with spam, pornography, identity theft, all kind of credit card scams. It's a cesspool, and the world has become a cesspool. And I call the white people, since I classify the world as a cesspool under this paradigm, I refer to the white people as cesspoolians, CESSPOOL-LIANS, cesspoolians. I know that we talk, Brother Neely talks about not name-calling, but I am not name-calling. I am identifying and I am describing, because we need descriptives. We need descriptive words to convey the concepts. And, for example, while at the party, while everybody was having a good time, the dog walked into the room. Okay, that's cool. While at the party, the pit bull, foaming at the mouth, walked into the room. That conveys a whole different concept. And you can see the people scatter. So it's the concept that's important that we'll talk about. So the cesspoolians, and what they have done through mind control and propaganda, they have made us as black people like a Frankenstein, and we have become cesspooliansteins. See, I got to create my own words because they're not going to do it for me. And so it's a cesspool. And the last aspect, so international prison, international plantation, international cesspool, the world is an international cemetery. All you have to do is listen to the news. Is nothing but destruction and death, destruction and death. And the world has just become like a shipwreck. It's a cemetery. It's nothing but death and destruction and death and destruction. And this is because of the white mind and the white mindset that dominates through the so-called governments, the corporations, and the mafia. And this is what comes under this idea of the genocide. And the definition of genocide is, there are two definitions. One is, this is when, and we've misused this word, it's when one group goes into the territory of another group and moves to exterminate that group because of religious, racial, political, social, or economic reasons. When the white people went into Tasmania, they exterminated every Tasmanian. They came from outside and went into that region. Read the story of Truganini. I can't give you the correct spelling. I think it's Truganini, Truganini. She was considered one of the last Tasmanian women. You read her story. It's very heartbreaking. As she explained what happened to her family members when the white dominators came in. Did I lose that thought? Okay, so let me move on. Maybe that thought will come back to me. So under the genocide is when one group goes into another area. Another one is when the Germans went into Namibia, into Africa, and exterminated the Herero. They came from outside and went into Africa. They said, I have an article in one of my books that said that the extermination of the Herero was one of the swiftest exterminations ever recorded. It happened so fast. Now, my definition of genocide is different from the book definition. My definition of genocide is if one African anywhere on the planet is harmed psychologically, culturally, educationally, economically, socially, politically, or spiritually, that constitutes genocide. Why do I say that? Because what that does, that harm diverts that person's ability to blossom according to his or her own human potential. So anything that interferes with that is a form of genocide. Now, I want to also add this. Maslow talks about the hierarchy of needs, and the highest level is self-actualization. I maintain that, self-actualization means reaching your full potential. I maintain that none of us as black people will ever reach our full potential. We could become astronauts, lawyers, doctors, whatever it might be, but we will never reach our potential because we are under or trapped in the context of white domination, and we can never be ourselves. So what we're doing, we are trying to be. We used to use the expression, leave me be, and white people will not let us be. I want to paint this quick picture. Imagine where you are standing as a brother or a sister. You're standing facing George W. Bush. This is a big open, like in a desert. And Bush is standing there with his little wry smile in a suit and tie, and behind him and next to him, he has a SWAT team, he has a jet plane, he has a helicopter, he has the Air Force, he has the Navy SEALs, the CIA, the FBI, the NSA, all of these different war machine instruments. And you are standing there by yourself facing him and this, I can't think of the word, but this group of violent people. And Bush looks at you and he says to you, as long as I am, you can never be. And that's how they have us. As long as the white man is, we will never be. We are trying to be, if you understand that. Okay, let me jump to the next domain on this paradigm. The next domain is democide, D-E-M-O-C-I-D-E. Democide is a government's intentionality or intention to exterminate a people within its own borders for political, religious, cultural, economic, or racial reasons. And the government will move to do that by the implementation of its policies and its laws, its regulations. In addition to that I'm adding to this, I have to go back and look at the definition, but I'm adding to this, and the government also gives a tacit sanction to its own other people outside that group, outside the racial group, outside the social group or cultural group that they're trying to move on, but they give the other people, the other white people, in other words, the sanction to engage in activities that also lead to the extermination of that group. Now, this is important. I think we have to correct our definition of extermination as well. If you look at what I call the homegrown organics, popularly known as the Indians, but they are the homegrown organics. they were in effect, some are still here, but in effect they were statistically significantly exterminated. And this is very important, this idea of statistical significance. When you go to school and you're doing a thesis and you're doing all this research, they ask you at the end of your research, was your research statistically significant? Meaning, does it have this value that we can take it and we can add on to it or amplify it and use it for something else? So the natives, the homegrown organics, they were statistically exterminated, even though some are still here. So I think that we have to really adjust our understanding of what extermination means. I hope you understand that little explanation for it. Then democide takes these various forms. It could be psychological democide. It could be cultural, economic, social, political, religious, etc. So these are the different forms of democide. The next domain on the planet is subtle suicide. Subtle suicide means that we as black people, as African people, take it upon ourselves in imperceptible, meaning you hardly notice it, ways to kill our own selves. Subtle suicide is a slow process of death. And we engage in different forms of subtle suicide. I was in a supermarket one night, and this brother was ahead of me, tall brother, about 28, 29 or so, and he was getting this big six-pack or this giant jumbo thing of beer. So I'm looking at this brother, and, I always dress. I never wear a suit and tie. I haven't worn a suit and tie in 30-something years. I want the white people to know I'm against them. I'm not trying to conceal that. If we're in prison and the prison guard is looking at all of us in prison, does he think that we're not trying to escape? So like I said earlier, I know the white people, it doesn't matter to them what we wear, what we have, etc. So I wear something that embellishes and enhances my identity, my self-esteem, wherever I go, anywhere on the planet. That's how I roll. So he's standing ahead of me, and what I do, I said, man, I need to talk to him. I don't know how he's going to respond. So I said, I got the correct information. I'm going to run this by him. I said, brother, do you know that drinking beer, it will kill your brain cells and it will kill your sperm? So he looks at me. He said, he doesn't really respond one way or another. I said, so, just think about that. So he gets the beer and he leaves. So I don't know what effect that would have on him. Maybe a year from that point, he might be drinking a brew and he said, wow, man, that guy, he told me this stuff is killing me. So this is a form of subtle suicide. I recently saw a guy, he bought a pack of cigarettes and, again, some beer. I said, man, this guy, he's really bent on his own subtle suicide. In my book, Food, Health, and You, Dr. Thomas Malone, Malone, and around 1989, an MD out of the CDC, Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta, did research that revealed at that time 60,000 black people die every year that don't have to die. He called this excess, EXCESS, excess deaths. And they're dying for homicide, cancer, all these different maladies that take them off of the planet earlier than they should go. This premature death. And so this is what subtle suicide is. So we can destroy ourselves psychologically, putting blonde in our hair, buying our children white dolls, calling ourselves minority, going to the crib. There are many third world. There are psychological things. I have a whole list of them. I've got about 40 or 50 lists in the psychological area, orbit, that illustrates subtle suicide psychologically. Then there's cultural subtle suicide, where, of course, we celebrate the White Horror Days, HORROR days. It's really DAZE, the White Horror Days. Then, having a white wedding, with the white gown and spending $15,000 and $25,000 on a white wedding, that's cultural subtle suicide. And there are others in this area. Then, of course, there's economics. I was in Harlem one time. I saw this brother. Somebody pointed out. I said, wow, I never saw a car like that. Somebody said, oh, that's a Bentley, I think it was. Another time I saw Bill Cosby's car behind the Apollo. He had this Rolls Royce. So, but excluding Bill Cosby, but I'm looking at this Bentley. I'm saying, now where did this brother come from in terms of where he lived? Where did he come from, and where is he going in Harlem in a Bentley? So what he did is he took this money. I don't know how he got the money, but he took this money. He exported his money to the white dominators. And so they made an enormous profit off of the purchase of this vehicle. Then they took that profit and then parlayed it to their relatives so that their relatives can continue the white domination over us. So there are these different forms. There's religious subtle suicide. That's honoring a white Jesus. A good book is The Historical Origin of Christianity by Professor Walter Williams. The Pagan Origin of the Christ Myth by our great esteemed, illustrious, colossal Dr. John G. Jackson. The Pagan Origin of the Christ Myth. There's Kersey Gray's 16 Crucified Saviors Before Christ. There's the First Council of Nicaea. There's another book in that area, but those are the basic books. But the Historical Origin of Christianity is probably one of the best of all those books to really understand that. And so we commit this religious subtle suicide. So we make this move to destroy ourselves because we have internalized and absorbed this domination. Now, I was thinking about this, Brother Gus, and I'm saying, I'm looking at the subtle suicide. I said, wow, man, people, they really are killing themselves. And I'm trying to figure out, how did this happen? So what I came up with was now we have genocide, democide, and subtle suicide. Between democide and subtle suicide is another domain, and that domain is entitled The Wrong Concepts. The Wrong Concepts. And the concept is the baseline for all thought. And under the wrong concept, there was a man, Alexander Litvinenko, Litvinenko, Alexander Litvinenko. And this goes back to Putin. He was an adversary of Putin when Putin was in the Russian government. And Putin, by the way, was the head of the KGB, so you know that he was a big-time demon. Putin had it out for this guy because this guy, he was against Putin, and this Litvinenko fled, and I think he was in the UK somewhere. While Litvinenko is in the UK, he gets a call. These two guys, they want to meet with him. They meet with him in a restaurant. They have this discussion. Litvinenko, he leaves, and in a couple of days or so, he falls ill. If you go online, I think you can see the video. He's in this hospital bed. His hair has fallen out. This is over a period of time. His hair's fallen out. He's lost all his weight. And he said he was given the most lethal, they discovered he was given the most lethal dose of radiation that exists on planet Earth. And when the so-called authorities tracked this down, they saw traces of this under the special light on the plane from Russia. They saw it in a restaurant. So probably they had a third agent pose as a waiter and give this guy this thing. So that's why one of the reasons I say don't eat out in restaurants, especially don't go to white restaurants, unless you might, if you go out, you go to a buffet where everybody's eating the same thing, but even there you have to be careful. If you go back and look at this thing, Legionnaire's disease in Philadelphia about 20 years ago, all these guys ate something and they all got sick and some of them died. So this is part of our strategy to de-whitenize. Don't eat out. Don't eat in white restaurants. Don't export your money to them, etc. So anyway, the reason I bring this up is because, like Litvinenko was poisoned, we have been poisoned with wrong concepts.
Dr. Kambon?
Yes, sir.
I didn't want to interrupt you, but I just wanted to share. I had this highlighted from your book, and it's exactly what you're talking about. Would it be all right if I just read this passage?
Yeah, sure.
This is from the last book. I try to encourage reading on the program. This is page 21, and exactly what you're saying. White numerical minority people have mastered concept control and concept engraving. They, the scientists, the teachers, the philosophers, the theologians, etc., have conquered the process of concept formation and developed a process to introduce and superimpose their concepts to and on the world, and a method to control all of the conceptual space that fills our minds. Since all of our conceptual space is in our minds, is dominated by white Western world thought concepts. We cannot think outside the box. Why is it virtually impossible for our people to think outside of the box? We can't think outside of the box or think analytically or critically because white systems have set all of the standards for thinking by creating the concepts we apply to everything we think about. In other words, the white numerical minority people have standardized concepts or the thought process. In the final analysis, someone who is brainwashed is one who has concretized white concepts in his, her mind, and there is no more space in his, her mind to accept any other concepts, especially he, she would categorically reject anything African or reject, quote unquote, that black stuff. We are above all else conceptual prisoners in a conceptual framework or penitentiary and suffer from conceptual incarceration. Better, we are under conceptual lockdown. This is page 21 from the last book, our guest, Dr. Kambon. If you could elaborate on that, and especially how when you have incorrect concepts, you really become totally incapable of grasping context.
Right. I think that's very significant in that it's like you take a glass and you fill it with water. There comes a point where you can put no more water in the glass. is filled to the top. If you put any more, it will overflow. That's how the white concepts have been layered on us, and the only way to get correct life-saving black liberation, total African liberation concepts into the person is they have to download or downsize. It's like really taking an intellectual enema and getting that stuff out so that now you have space on the top for some of the black stuff. Now, there's some things, the other things I want to say. They have layered these concepts on us, and they have become concrete. It's like if you take a new paintbrush and you're getting ready to paint, you can take that brush, let's say it's like a big 4-inch brush, 5-inch brush, and the bristles, man, they're flexible. You can put them on your face and boom, it feels, it's good, right? The bristles are flexible. Then you start painting. And then all of a sudden, you are called away, and you're called away for a couple of days. You come back 3 days later. You had just put the paintbrush down. When you come back, that paintbrush is hard as rock. You could put it in paint thinner or paint remover. You can do anything you want, but it's hard to get it back to the condition it was in because it has become so hard. And that is what happens with these concepts. And I got a little paradigm that I'm going to share with you that illustrates this process and how that process actually takes place. In other words, how our concepts become concretized. I'll share that with you shortly. So under subtle suicide, then we have these different domains, and then we have the wrong concept. Now, under the wrong concept, this is what I wanted to say. We have been injected, infected, and affected with the poison of wrong concepts. And as a result, having the wrong concept can only lead to a wrong conclusion. In other words, we're on the move to liberation from under white domination. And if we have the wrong concept, it takes us off of the path of blacknificence. I have to create my own words. I created blacknificent, meaning we are more than magnificent. We are blacknificent. So the wrong concept leads to the wrong conclusion. The wrong conclusion takes us off the path of blacknificence. Being off the path of blacknificence leads to some form of death. Again, it could be psychological death, cultural death, economic, social, religious death. There's a story I was going to tell you toward the end. A couple of weeks ago, I was listening to a program dealing with education. A grandfather called in. They were talking about the importance of education, et cetera. Same old story. We've been running this same scenario for 50 years about education. So the grandfather calls in. He says, education is very important. He goes on to explain that he and his grandson were watching Serena Williams in a title tennis match against a white woman. I never call white females ladies. I only refer to African women as ladies. It's impossible for a white woman to be a lady. And if you remind me, I want to explain that in a minute. So the grandfather and the grandson, they're watching this tennis match, and Serena Williams is victorious. She defeats the female tennis player. The grandfather is excited. He said, wow, she won. Look at that. And he jumps up, and he's very happy. He looks down, and the grandson is forlorn. He's clearly not happy. Grandfather said, look at that. She won. She won. The little boy is 5 years old. The little boy, the grandfather says, aren't you happy? The little boy says, no, I didn't want her to win. The grandfather said, you didn't want her to win. Why not? The little boy says, because she's dirty, she's ugly, and she's black. It's a 5-year-old little boy. Right? Now, he's 5. Where did he get this concept from? There's some research. You know, Kenneth Clark did the Doll, D-O-L-L, the Doll study in the 50s. He testified in the Supreme Court, Brown versus Board of Ed, talking about the children selected the black dolls. Dr. Margaret Field, F-I-E-L-D, Spencer, also did a doll study in 1989 where she shows pictures to black children. And the pictures are the same children, the same clothes, hat, black children and white children. And the children said, she said, Dr. Spencer says, can you pick out the pretty girl? The little girl picks out the white girl. Can you pick out the dirty boy? The little boy, he's about 10 or 11, he picks out the little brother as the dirty boy. And then they asked this little girl, about 5 or 6 years old, said, show me the ugly girl. Yeah, show me the ugly girl. And the little girl picks the little black girl on this portrait. She said, well, why is she the ugly girl? And the little girl says, because she's not the color she's supposed to be. So these are children 4 or 5 years old, 6 years old. They're already under conceptual lockdown with these concepts. So off of this path of blacknificence is a form of death, and it's because we have these wrong concepts. And this is the link to the subtle suicide. So the democide, and this is very important. I look at the world, I wanted to mention, in 2 dimensions. External, meaning what the white dominators are doing, and internal, what we are doing, meaning what we as individuals are doing and what we as a community are doing. So internal, external. And with the wrong concept, that becomes the link to the subtle suicide. Because in my book, The Last Black Man Standing, it says that we as Africans come here as pure, unadulterated, uncontaminated spirit. This is part of African cosmology. We are pure, unadulterated, uncontaminated spirit. That our little babies come here directly from the ancestors. And they come, according to some traditions, they come with messages for us. Baba Fukiawa, F-U-K-I-A-U. He has several powerful books. One is African Cosmology. The other is Self-Healing Power and Therapy. You want to get that book. Self-Healing Power and Therapy is part of Bantu Congo philosophy ideology. In his book, Baba Fukiawa says that in African tradition, every child is born as a living son, S-U-N. Now, what I have done, I've combined my idea, and I didn't know about his book until after I wrote mine. I said, wow, okay, there's somebody else I'm connecting with on this level. And what I say is that you hear me refer to us as, like I have a lot of African sons, S-U-N-S. They call me and, we have this exchange. And I say that we are a per-son, P-E-R-S-U-N. And that means that each of us as an African, we are a per sun. That means that we are a piece of the radiant sun. And as a piece of the radiant sun, our mission is to be illuminated, that means knowledgeable, and illuminating, that means spreading knowledge. So you'll hear me, you'll see in my writings, I talk about the African per sun. And I think that's very significant to understand that. So we have these wrong concepts, and the wrong concepts represent the link that lead us to subtle suicide because we got the wrong concept. So a brother said, well, I'm a thug. I had a family come to me in the bookstore. They brought their son, 19 years old. They said, we want you to talk to him. He thinks he's a thug. So, I ran it down. Okay, you're a thug, but if they get you in prison, you're not going to be a thug. You're a little short, thin brother. They're going to jack you up. So, but in his mind, he thinks he's a thug. So this is based on the concepts that are formed in our minds, and the concepts are incorrect, and they lead to some form of death. Okay, now the next domain, I'm kind of fast forward. The next domain is feedback. We always get some form of feedback. Whatever we do, whoever we are, getting feedback. And feedback is verbal, nonverbal, physical. Sometimes no feedback is a form of feedback. But I maintain as black people, we are feedback illiterates, meaning we don't know how to read the feedback, or we misread the feedback, or if we can read it correctly, we ignore the feedback. The death of Sean Bell, shot all those times by the police, that's feedback. The death of Oscar Grant, that's feedback. The death of Taisha Miller in California, she had, I think, an epileptic attack. Slumped in her car, passed out. The cops saw a weapon in the glove compartment, shot her 19 times. That's feedback. We're always getting feedback, but we're not reading the feedback correctly. This is important to be able to read this feedback correctly. Now, there's a little piece in here somewhere that I think I left out, but that's kind of the overview. Okay, and then next to the feedback is black liberation, and I'm going to come back and talk about that. Next to black liberation is diversion, and next to diversion on this chart is what I call ratinization, R-A-T-N-I-Z-A-T-I-O-N, ratinization. Now, there's a piece that I'm omitting, and I'm trying to go back to recollect, that part of the wrong concept, I'm going to put it under wrong concept, and then we can come back and I might be able to correct it. But under wrong concept, what leads to wrong concept is, how does this happen? It happens through different vehicles, various vessels. It comes through propaganda, and there are at least 6 or 7 forms of propaganda. One is testimonial. Testimonial is a technique used where they would take a popular person like Michael Jordan or Kobe and have that person advertise a product. And because we are not critical in our analysis, we associate the person with the product. So that's testimonial. Propaganda is used to trick people. I got a great series that I taped. I was looking at it last night about commercials and children. And I'm looking at it, I'm just laughing how they trick these children into buying all these toys, and the children think they're going to get the background and the scenery, and when they open the box, this is one little lone toy. I said, man, it's easy to trick kids. We refer to them as children. So it's propaganda. Then the next is mind control, which is similar to propaganda. But mind control leads us to the wrong concepts. I think you mentioned that you had Stephen Jacobs on your program.
Yes, sir.
Mind Control in America. Gary Null, N-U-L-L, has a good book, I understand, dealing with mind control, tricking people. There is a good book, I haven't read the book, but I know about it, entitled Deadly Spin, S-P-I-N. The guy's name is Potter, and he talked about how they trick the people in this healthcare maze and what's going on, how they set up front companies. So check that out online, Deadly Spin. So that's propaganda, mind control. The next form of wrong concept that gets to us is through mixed messages. Mixed messages, this is an important definition. A mixed message is that white people tie to the truth a lie. They tie to the truth a lie. I said that we come as pure, unadulterated, uncontaminated spirit. Baba Fukiawa says that we're born as living sun. That means that in essence, we are pure, we are the truth. And in fact, as African people, we are the only people on the planet that actually knows what the truth is and what the truth looks like. Nobody else on the planet knows that other than the Africans. They feign like they know, but they really don't know. We're the only ones that know the truth. So since the white dominators are scientists and they have studied us, they know we are the truth. And so what they do, they tie to the truth a lie. So I'll leave that. Now I'm going to jump down. The next part is paradox. This also comes under the wrong concept. Paradox. Paradox is something that leads us into the quicksand of dilemma. Now I'm going to tie mixed message and paradox together. A great example is or was Valentine's Day. Here a person, let's say a man, a person, he loves his wife, but he's conscious and he doesn't celebrate European horror days. But he's now in a trick bag because, let's say, his wife, she kind of, it's Valentine's Day, honey, what's up. So he's now compelled because love is the truth, but the Valentine's horror day is the lie. So they tied to the truth this lie, and we are caught in a dilemma. And when we are caught in this dilemma, it paralyzes us. But this is a part of dealing with the wrong concepts. Christmas is a great example of mixed message paradox. And it's really the ideal form of subtle suicide because Christmas is interlocking. It ties us up psychologically, culturally, socially, health, and economically. And, of course, if we're spending our money, everything Marcus Garvey said is political. And then the next, I think that this is vitally important, after paradox, is intermittent reinforcement. Intermittent reinforcement. This means that we are rewarded occasionally, and as a result, we keep engaging in a behavior that in the final analysis is not really benefiting us. For example, I have a puppy, and I call the puppy, I give the puppy a bone. I call the puppy again, give the puppy a bone. Call the puppy a third, fourth, fifth time, I don't give the puppy a bone. Sixth, seventh time, I give the puppy a bone. 11th time, I give the puppy a bone. So this is intermittent reinforcement. But every time I call the puppy comes thinking it's going to get this bone. So like with religion, we say, oh, man, I'm praying for this job. We get the job, I say, oh, Jesus answered my prayers. Next time we pray for something else, it doesn't happen. Jesus must have been asleep this time. Then something else happens, we don't get it. Then something else happens, we get it. So this is this intermittent reinforcement, and this is a very powerful technique used to control and manipulate people. Then under this is the right concept, but unrelated to black liberation. Now, there are three words that we must know: relate, relevant, and relative. And everything we do must relate to black liberation, be relative to black liberation, be relevant and relative to black liberation. Because black liberation, write this down, black liberation is the African gold standard. And we measure everything, all our behaviors, all our actions, all our thoughts. Do these actions, behaviors, thoughts, are they steps in the process to liberation, or are they diversions from liberation? So I'll give you an example. After 9/11, it was said that George W. Bush finally caught Saddam Hussein, the man who had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11. Totally unrelated. And this is how we are. We have the right concept, but it's unrelated to liberation. And so this is where we are under the wrong concept. These are some of the factors that lead us to some form of subtle suicide. Now, as I said, subtle suicide is a form of death, and I want to give you some titles and some ideas about what else is going on the planet relative to the extermination of African people under white domination. So I'm not talking by myself. There are other people that have a higher mind. There's a film that you must see entitled Quiet Storm. If you haven't seen it, see it. This represents the highest mind in this realm at this time for African people. Quiet Storm. It's a film out of the UK. And here are some books that tell us this is feedback by Carl Scheer. His pen name is Sagittarius. Written in 1973, the book is Countdown to Black Genocide. It's a fictional account of the U.S. government realizing that they are facing diminishing resources, and in order to survive, they have to exterminate part of the population, and that part of the population is black people. Countdown to Black Genocide. Real fascinating book. The other book is The Death of Black America. Another book is entitled Somebody's Trying to Kill You by Dr. Davidson.
He was a guest on the program.
Right, Somebody's Trying to Kill You. Another book is entitled Kill Them Before They Grow, The Misdiagnosis of Black Children in Schools. Another title is Rearing African Children Under Enemy Occupation. Another film that I recommend is entitled Executive Action, I think around 1972-73, dealing with the assassination of John Kennedy. Really a very good film and very well done, starring Burt Lancaster and Robert Ryan. Robert Ryan played the cop in The Godfather, who Michael had to shoot. But there's a scene where they are setting up Oswald to be the patsy for the assassination of Kennedy, and as they're leaving the room where they just met, Robert Ryan and Burt Lancaster walking into the garden, and Robert Ryan says to Burt Lancaster, he says, yes, I think he said, Jim, our goal is to depopulate. There are too many people on the planet. Our goal is to depopulate the planet down to 550 million people. He said that means the blacks, the Hispanics, poor whites, etc. So he's telling you right on the film. They're giving us feedback. Then there's Kodak's Alimentarius, where the woman says that they're going to, depopulate the planet, that 1 billion people will die from starvation, another billion will die from malnutrition. There was one I did not want to forget, but those are the two. Oh, Ted Turner Wants You Dead. This is an article in my book. He was interviewed in Audubon magazine. It's very interesting. Audubon was a brother who the Audubon Society is named after him because he was so into birds and life that, anyway. But Ted Turner, in this interview in Audubon magazine, says the ideal population of planet Earth is between, I think he said, 300 million and 500 million. So we're getting feedback all the time. Okay, so now let's move to black liberation from under white domination. We know what the solution is. Well, let me back up. We need a once-and-for-all solution to the biggest problem on planet Earth. And so how do we get there? And this is the work that we should be engaged in. We should not continue to be on this treadmill of talking about the same issues over and over again. So part of the work is, I'm going to go back to a book by Alan Lightman, Lightman, and he wrote a book entitled The 22 Greatest Discoveries of the 20th Century. And he's a physicist, and he decided that he was profoundly interested in what was the process that led this person to his or her great discovery. And that's the work that we have to be doing. We have to discover that we have to make this discovery. About a month ago, I listened to Science Friday. I think it's very fascinating. And on Science Friday, they interviewed a scientist who was so excited. He said that they just discovered a new planet. And he's articulating the characteristics of this planet and what makes it a new planet. And he's just, this is a new planet, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm saying to myself, because I listen to all these things because I want to see how they fit in my process toward liberation. And I said, now here, and I maintain, Brother Gus, that the solution to the problem is already in existence. But we are not focused on the solution, and that's why we have not come up with it. They keep us on the treadmill of education, jobs, housing, police brutality, et cetera, subtle suicide, looking at the distractions. And I'm saying we got to not look at the distractions, but deal with the distractor. But he says we discovered this planet. I said, no, the planet was always there. You just discovered it. Dr. Gloria Dunstan out of Howard University, considered one of the top geneticists in the country, says that the universe is prepared to bring into existence what we command. She also says, basically, that for every problem, there is a solution. So I maintain, and this is how I've come to this conclusion, and this is why I honor our ancestors, because our ancestors showed us not that they were great, they were colossal and stupendous. They also showed us what did not work in solving the problem once and for all. I look at what, as Dr. Welsing said, the white side of the board. What are they doing on the white side of the chessboard? They're stopping brothers, and this goes back to that subordination. And I heard somebody say it today. Oh, Malcolm said it. But listen, we say driving while black. I was stopped by the cop driving while black. Or I didn't get the job because I was black. That's psychologically subordinating. What we should say is not driving while black, driving while white people are being white. Not, I didn't get the job because I was black. You say, I didn't get the job because white people were being white. And that's a whole different context and understanding. And it doesn't put us in a diminished psychological position. So, man, I lost my other thought, man. So this idea of the solution, it's already in existence. And we have to focus on it. There's a guy, and I want you to go online and check this out. I think his name is, people say, well, we'll never solve this problem. It's too massive. But I always think about, if you have a little spot where you live and it's an empty corner, that empty corner represents to me the impossible. And if you look back through history, things that seemed impossible became possible. They said, oh, somebody will never walk on the moon. So that was impossible at one time, but people focused on it, and presumably it happened. If you watch this movie with O.J., I think it's called Capricorn 2. This is where these astronauts go to the moon, but it was really a Hollywood staged event. Really a very good movie. If you look at that corner room of the room represents what's impossible. So I want you to check out, I think the name is Philippe Petit, P-E-T-I-T, I believe. Very few people know his name, but this is the guy that snuck into the World Trade Center along with a friend over a span of time and put this tightrope between both buildings. I don't know how high that was, 80 stories? And he tightrope walked, dancing and singing on the tightrope up above the World Trade Center. And people will look at this guy. But while his friends were partying and getting high, he was focusing. He said, I'm going to do this. I want to do this for whatever reason. But since he focused, he was able to do that. It's astonishing what this guy did. Now, I want to tell you about this whole idea of impossible. There is a woman in New York. She won the lottery twice, I think for $1 million, 2 different times over a period of 1 or 2 years. Bought a ticket, won $1 million lottery. Bought another ticket another time, won $1 million lottery. I think the chances of her winning that lottery twice was, forgot what they said, 1 in, 8 trillion or something. But you get the point is that what seemed impossible was possible. I have in one of my books that's not published an article about a fisherman who found a completely blue lobster. The chances, the possibility of doing that was 1 in, don't quote me on the numbers, 1 in 15 million, 25 million, something like that. Then at a different time, a different place, another fisherman found a yellow lobster. The chances of finding a yellow lobster are like 1 in 30 million. I cite these, brothers and sisters, as measures of what seems impossible becomes possible. Our mission, in my estimation, in part is to free each self. I have a whole paradigm set up to free each self, a process for freeing our psychological, cultural, economic, health, etc. selves. But our mission is to solve this problem and not pass the problem on. And I know the solution. The issue right now for us is the implementation of the solution. And we have not come up with it because we haven't focused on it. And I'm going to go back to my other statement about the chessboard. I look at what's happening on the chessboard on the white side, and what they're doing is that they are stopping brothers, who I said are maximum security, because it's logical that people who are oppressed, we got black political prisoners languishing in prison, that it's likely to be a brother to come up with the solution. So what they're doing, if you saw the movie Minority Report, and what Bush did, they are engaging in preemptive strikes. So they stopped the brother on bogus charges. Now if you follow this thing, they're establishing all these DNA banks, presumably to catch criminals. I don't believe nothing these whiteys say. But they set up these DNA banks because they stopped the brothers to get their fingerprints, to get their pictures, to get their DNA. Now, I want you to think about this, that I have concluded, I've come to this conclusion, that the white dominators who are scientists have the DNA of Malcolm. You know how you go to the hospital and you see them with the X-ray up on the board and the light is showing where a fracture might be. So I see that they have the DNA up on that board of Malcolm, of Dr. Khalid, of Nat Turner, Harriet Tubman, Ida B. Wells, Marcus Garvey, and they're looking at the configuration of their DNA. And the DNA banks that they're establishing are designed to take the DNA of these brothers and match their DNA, not against criminals, but against someone who could possibly come up with the solution, the once and for all solution to the biggest problem on planet Earth. So this is preemptive to get this DNA, and I think that's why they do, in part, what they do, to stave off and derail, that's D-E-R-E-A-L, to derail a brother or sister from coming up with the solution to the problem. Look at what else they do. You see they just had Christmas, they had New Year's, they had the bowl games, they had the Super Bowl, the Grammys, the NBA All-Star Game, diversion. diversions that layer fake concepts on us to keep us from focusing. But luckily, Brother Gus, thank goodness, we do not have to be unified in order to come up with the solution to the problem. We only need one person. If I have a class of 30 students and I ask a question, I don't need all 30 students to answer the question. I only need one. And the white dominators know, as sure as we are breathing, that someone is going to come up, not a Messiah, but someone is going to come up with the concept of how to implement the solution to the problem. So part of what we have to do is we have to de-whitenize. That means to download and delete and downsize the white concepts. We have to de-savage. White people often say, and I want to talk quickly about this, about projection. In psychology, projection is someone says, okay, this person, you're a liar, you're a thief, you're a criminal, and what they're doing, they're projecting their own characteristics onto someone else. That's projection. As white people were the first to come up with the word nigger, and what they were actually doing was that they were projecting their own characteristics onto African people and making African people subhuman. So I maintain that there's only one nigger on planet Earth. Actually, there are two niggers on planet Earth. The white man and the white woman. The definition of a nigger, someone who has the power to pollute oceans by dumping toxic waste and oil and debris all throughout the oil, and also to destroy the coral reefs. Anyone who can pollute the air to the extent that the air becomes foul, and they have to put up alerts about, it's an orange day, don't go outside. Anybody who will take a black child and bring that child into the school, and that teacher consciously or unconsciously destroys and cripples and kills the spirit of that child, that is my definition of a nigger. And I want brothers to get it straight. We are not niggers. And I have never used that word until about 4 or 5 years. When I grew up, that wasn't even in our thought to call somebody that. And the most we could do is be imitation of niggers. And we are poor imitations of niggers. So we need to think about that. And we're not thugs. We're not criminals. And I tell brothers that I come across, if you de-whitenize, you might be the solution to the problem. You have to de-whitenize, downsize, de-savage. So what the white people have done, they have reduced us. They call us savages, but they're projecting. But they have reduced us psychologically to that. And what do I mean by savage? I was thinking about it. As I said, I used to tape everything. And I remember coming across this program that I taped in Kenya. The Africans were chasing down elephants and cutting off their faces with chainsaws in order to get the tusks. They were also chasing down baby elephants, cutting their faces off to get the ivory and sell the ivory on the market to get money. And as I looked at that, man, I was just so sad. And I said, man, this is what we've been reduced to. And I see what our people do to one another. You know, lie, cheat, etc. We know the scenario. And they've reduced us to a savage mentality. And we have to figure out how to, and I have an idea, I've got a little paradigm for it, to get us out of savage and then move us to the level of de-whitenization, and then from de-whitenization move us to the level of being human. Because the idea, the concept is, the purer we can become, mind, body, and spirit, the closer we will come to the solution, to the once and for all solution to the problem. And this is why on the white side of the board, they do all the things that they do to keep us layered and mired in wrong concepts and subtle suicide. So once we become human, then we can engage in the re-Africanization process, which will bring us to the discovery. So we are on the brink of discovering the impossible. And when you think of all of the things that have manifested in existence, they started out as a problem that someone solved. Someone's hands were cold, they thought about gloves, shoes, a cash register, a weed eater, a chainsaw, anything you can, a chair. These didn't just pop up, but people thought about them. And this is where we are. I think that it's a wonderful time to be on the planet, to have a higher mind and be on the search for the discovery. And like Johnny Cochran found that one little sentence. I'm going to talk a little bit about this brother, Charles Hamilton Houston, a brother I really admire. I love this brother for the personification of who he was. He was the lawyer that brought about 5 or 6 lawsuits that led to Brown versus Board of Education. He was born in the Massachusetts area, 1890-something, I think. And he was the son of a lawyer. His father was a lawyer. I think his mother was a teacher. He went to school, you know, with white students, was a good student, and I think he went to college, finished college, and he was a very bright student, and he was drafted into World War I. He goes to World War I. I think he was stationed in France. He was an officer. He goes to France, and some of his fellow soldiers were murdered by the white dominators. Some of the men were murdered while they had on their uniforms. He writes this letter home to his parents. He says, in part, when I get out of here, I'm going to do all I can to change things. He said, quote, I can't see living in a world ruled by them. And when he got out of the service, he went to Harvard, was a top student, graduated from Harvard, law, went to Howard University, became the chair of the law school, et cetera, et cetera. Went to the NAACP, used that as a vehicle to go to the South and take pictures, photos of the black schools that cost $5,000. The white schools cost $15,000 to build. He said, oh, you want it separate but equal? His goal was to overturn the Plessy decision. He said, you want it separate but equal? He said, okay, we go for that. Give us the $10,000 difference, and so our school will be $15,000, and then we will be equal. So the white dominators, they weren't going for that. So I don't think his goal necessarily was integration. Somehow we got tricked into that integration. And I maintain that integration, that two things destroyed us. The integration, number one. The other was that we brought television into our homes. But integration was designed to give white people greater access to black people. But Charles Houston devoted his life, man, and they said they talked to his doctor or his biographer. Her name is Gina McCrae. And the doctor said that Charles Hamilton Houston never went to one social event, not one. You see him at night with this little eye shade, this little monocle, reading over law books, looking for one word, one idea, one concept that he could use to overturn that Supreme Court decision. That's not really the Supreme Court. It's just a bunch of, but anyway. And that's what he did night and day. And his doctor was interviewed. His doctor said, I never saw one social event that Charlie attended. And the biographer said, no, this woman that was his secretary became a judge. When she was interviewed, she said, Charles Hamilton Houston had this saying he used to say. Said, I would rather die on my feet than live on my knees. And this judge, after Charles Houston died at age 53, she said he literally gave his life for the cause. And for that, I love Charles Hamilton Houston. I love William Patterson and Paul Robeson. I didn't mention their petition, We Charge Genocide. William Patterson had a book that preceded that entitled The Man Who Cried Genocide. So I love them. I love the ancestors for what they did, man. There are no words to describe what they have done to enhance our understanding of what must be done in terms of coming up with the once and for all solution. So there's another saying by Steve Biko. He was the young brother who led the Black Consciousness movement in South Africa. And he told them, because they were brainwashed in South Africa, he said, listen, you all are not, I think it was Kaffir. I don't know if that word comes from there, but Kaffir is like a Negro. He said, you're not that. He said, you are African. You are the first people on the planet, et cetera, et cetera. And they killed Steve Biko for him trying to raise the consciousness of the Africans. But Biko had this saying. He said that it is better to die for an idea that will live than to live for an idea that will die. And then a fabulous movie that I recommend is Burn, B-U-R-N, with Marlon Brando. Excellent movie. I don't know the setting, but it's like a little island. And this brother, as a young boy, starts working for Marlon Brando, et cetera, this thing. And as the movie unfolds, this brother becomes conscious and he sees the plight of his people being enslaved by the British, and he sets out for this revolution. And they call Marlon Brando back to capture this brother because Marlon Brando knows the brother's mindset, etc. And they capture one of the men of this brother, and Marlon Brando is interrogating this guy. He says, well, what does your leader say? And the guy says, I hope I get this correct. He says, our leader says, it's better to know where you are going and not know how to get there than how to go and not know where you are going. So many of our people are getting dressed up and they're going, they know how to go, but they don't know where they're going. We know precisely where to go, and that's where we are. We are on the brink of the implementation of the once and for all solution. It's already in the universe. I'm not just saying this. I'm underscoring it. The solution is here. Let's focus on it. Don't get distracted by the distractors and the distractions. So I think there might be some more things that I could inject or interject into this. But I think that that is where we are at this point. And if you have questions, we can do that at this point.
Oh, beautiful. Context of white supremacy. Again, our guest for the program, Dr. Kamau Kambon. Privileged to have him on the program. I saw in your book, you said Steve Biko, he authored I Write What I Like, and you said yours, to be more accurate, would be I like what I write.
Right. Oh, I love my writing, man. I love my writing. I have so much fun. And this is really enjoyable. I mean, I have, and I get on Negroes, man, and, I know, and what I do, I'm describing, and what I'm describing the behavior compared to the gold standard. I want to amplify this and project the gold standard. And let me give you the full statement. Black liberation - total African liberation is the only ideology, philosophy, concept, and action that gets us from under white mind control, terror, domination. So I have a little quiz in one of my books. It's a fill in the blank. It says dash. It starts out with the dash. You got to fill that in. Gets us is the only ideology, philosophy, concept, and action that gets us from under white mind control domination. So let's fill in the blank. What words can go in there? Being a Hebrew Israelite gets us from under white domination? No. Being a Mason? No. Being a Black Greek? No. Being a Protestant or a Catholic? No. I mean, you could just go down the list. What is the only thing that can get us? Like the Egyptians could say, for example, Egyptian liberation is the only ideology, philosophy, concept, and action that can get us from under domination, etc. The people in Yemen, they can fill in that Yemenis liberation is the only thing. Libya, so you can go down the list. So I have it on, I don't know if it's on the site or if it's in one of my books. All my books starting to run together. I've got so much information. I have websites. I have pictures. You can go to the site, check it out. Now, I also want to put this on the table, Brother Gus. What I'm talking about is not hate. What I'm talking about is high mathematical science in terms of coming to a conclusion. If you go down the checklist, voting, education, getting money, none of that has solved the problem. So some people come to me and talk to me. I'm not dealing with that. Don't bring that to me because that's taking me off the course. I'm focused on this. Don't come and talk to me about, thugs. I've got in my book messages to the ancestors, from the ancestors. It says we're trapped in the context of this domination, and what I have designed through the black tricks is how to avoid the clan mines, KLANMINES, of white domination, in order to get to the point where we operate in the green zone, which is the life zone, as opposed to the white domination, which is the death, the lies, the trickery, the deceit, instead of operating in that zone. So I said before, we don't need everybody. The Million Man March had 1 million men. They all had 1 million different concepts. We don't need all that. We don't have to be unified. We just need one person, just one. And the white dominators know Charles Murray wrote The Bell Curve. Shockley, William Shockley, Arthur Jensen. Jensen, I think, was out in California. Shockley was somewhere. Francis Welsing debated Shockley in a series of these dialogues about intelligence, and blacks, according to them, had low IQs, genetically inferior. Charles Murray wrote The Bell Curve. Same old stuff, black people are intellectually inferior. And I want to say this: black people are so intellectually inferior. Tell me about all these white people in this country are on white welfare. The auto industry is in collapse. So where are all these intelligent white people? The education system is really jacked up. The airline industry, one airline, I think it was Delta, lost $1 billion in 3 months. So where are all these? I wrote all this out. Where are all these intellectual white people that's supposed to be running these things? When in '73, I knew then that America had to collapse because ignorant people were in charge. And they were hiring their ignorant relatives. They were all on some form of white welfare. That's what it is. When you see all these cops fire, there's a brother laying in the street. They have four fire trucks, ambulance, cops. They're all rushing to the scene, not to help the brother, so that they could be the first to file a report so they could get their hate check, I call it. This is all white welfare. And it's got to fail. It's impossible. Look, man, 73, 74, I knew, and I said it. It's impossible for this thing to sustain. It's unsustainable because ignorant people are running it. And now you mean to tell me that with our brilliance, we built the pyramids and we ancient Kemet this, ancient Kemet that. Okay, well, that's cool. But we did all that, but we can't defeat a cave people, a third grade, the equivalent of a third grade people. Come on, man. I got a picture in one of my books, and it's a little boy throwing a rock at a tank. I think I saw it. I think the first time I may have seen it was a little boy in Vietnam. And then there's a little boy in Palestine throwing this rock at a tank. I said, man, this little guy, he got courage. You see this little boy about 3 weeks ago, they said initially he was 10 years old. I saw later he's 12 years old. Walked in with this vest in Afghanistan and, blew up all these people. People want liberation, man. And these so-called governments, corporations, mafia, they have dominated, and we don't know what it will be to trigger. Like the little guy that ignited himself in Tunisia, triggered the eruption that occurred that spilled over all over the place. So it could be one little thing. We don't know. Just like Charles Hamilton used to looking for that one word, Johnny Cochran finding that one little statement, Julius Butler, FBI informant, turned that brother's life around, saved Geronimo Pratt's life. Jijaga Geronimo Pratt is his official name. So this is where we are, man. I'm very excited about what you're doing. I kind of was, I don't know about this brother, but it really doesn't matter. And I don't care about agents. I don't care about agents. And I said that we are all black people are agents because all of us have a little whitey inside of us. And it's just a matter of time as to how that whitey will surface, whether it will surface psychologically or economically. There's a story about this brother. He got married to this sister, and I think they were married almost a year. So he's sitting down, he's sitting downstairs, you're reading the paper, all of a sudden she walks downstairs, got her suitcases packed. He's befuddled, what's going on? She said, every year my sister and a couple of our friends, we go to Las Vegas, and we all each take, I don't know, $5,000, and we gamble. He said, oh, you didn't tell me about that. I didn't know this about you. That's a little economic whitey that came out of her. So right, so we got this in us, and the goal is to expunge these agents. And now I didn't talk about this, but I talked a little bit about the rats in our race, and this is a description. Julius Butler was a rat. I think William O'Neill, who turned on Fred Hampton, Chairman Fred Hampton. Then there was, I can see him. He was the one that was the agent for the police, that was the bodyguard for Malcolm. I can see us. And Malcolm said, when you see what other people are doing to get their liberation, then you'll know what you should be doing to get your liberation. In World War, White War II, the Nazis invaded Norway, and there was a guy who was a collaborator with the Nazis. His name was, I think his first name was Vidkum. Don't quote me on that, but his last name was Quisling, Quisling, and he was a collaborator. And he collaborated with the Germans to rule in a draconian way over his own people. And so his name became associated with being a collaborator, a Quisling. Then there was in South Africa, they put the necklace around the collaborators. In Guatemala, the story emerged that, now I'm not advocating anything, I'm just reporting. In Guatemala, anybody that cooperates with the authorities, they kill the person, cut the person's tongue out, and take the forefinger and put the finger in the mouth to show and demonstrate that this person collaborated with the enemy. In Iraq, anybody that collaborates with the coalition forces, they deal with. Sinn Féin, the military wing of the Irish Republican Army, they interviewed the head, I can't remember his name, but they talked about how they deal with collaborators. So we do have these people in our domain, and they're not the focus, but they are agents at the highest level. We have to be aware. I have a whole story I tell about a gunslinger and the gunfighter getting ready to fight another gunslinger. But I'll save that for another time. Okay, so with that, brother, I'm going to wrap this up. Okay, now, do you have questions or any comments, or can you illuminate on anything that I have said? Or all right.
My co-host, she is listening, and she is 11, and she is also about trying to find a resolution to the problem dealing with white people. She has some questions she would like to ask, if that's acceptable.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Justice, your line should be open. Feel free.
I know that, hello, Dr. Kambon.
Yes, hi, greetings, Queen. Well, you're 11 Princess. Yes, go ahead with your question.
What are some of the best things non-white people can do to work to eliminate the system of racism, white supremacy as soon as possible?
Oh, that's a beautiful question. In my estimation, what we have to do, what we should be working on, and actually it's already in existence, we have to create a system. We have spent a lot of time creating programs. And in one of my writings, I learned that we cannot defeat a system with a program. We need a system to defeat a system. And in fact, each one of us, each person is a system. So, Brother Gus, you're not just Brother Gus. You are a psychological Gus. You're a cultural Gus. You're economic. You're political. You're health. And what we have to do is to create a system that protects us from penetration by the white dominators. In other words, we have to minimize our contact with them. And by creating a system, for example, the Montgomery bus boycott, when all of the brothers and sisters decided to not ride on the bus, they were collective, they had a collective concept that manifested in an action to defeat the white dominators. Although they went in the wrong direction, they should have had their own little bus company. But so to answer your question, we need a system. And the system is, each one of us is a system. And everything that we do, everything we think, say, and do either supports white terror domination or it is a move to defeat it. And if we can do that, and it doesn't take a lot of people, the great brother, I didn't get a chance to talk about great concepts like Marcus Garvey's concept and Elijah Muhammad, but Brother Ken Bridges, I think he has been relegated to obscurity, but he was the brother that conceived, along with Al Wellington, the Mata Network. If you can get your hands on that tape, that is that's an awesome concept, the Mata Network. And these concepts, again, it goes back, and Ken Bridges said, we don't need to get everybody. We just need to get a little core group. And once we get this core group, it will, I forgot the word he used, it will cascade. That's not the right word, but he said it will, but it will cascade and it will gain momentum. And as it gains momentum, it'll pick up other people. So once we start measuring ourselves against the gold standard in terms of our actions and our behaviors, it's just a matter of time. But we also have to be thinking about, that's why I think science and chemistry and mathematics are so important. And this is why they steer our children away from this. I know, Brother Gus, you mentioned critical thinking, but I say not just critical thinking, but comparative critical thinking, because we're always comparing against the gold standard. So I hope that answers your question, that you are a little system, and that your system, by your behavior and actions, can defeat the white dominators. For example, the police in Cincinnati, Ohio, 8 or 9 years ago, shot this brother. I think his name was Tim Thomas. And this was like the 12th or 14th execution of a brother. So what the brothers and sisters did, they refused to go into the central city to shop. I know a couple of people instrumental in setting up that boycott. It got to the point where the mayor wanted to go to court to get an injunction issued to force the people to come back to shop. So by them employing this one little concept, it made a huge difference. So I hope that answers your question, that you are a system, and we need a system to defeat a system. And each one of us is a system. Just like I said that each white person is a carrier of their system, we have to be a carrier of our system.
What are your views on children watching television without what they are watching being explained to them?
No, in my classes in education and test and measurements, I used to have my students watch cartoons and analyze cartoons for to see who the main character was, which was usually a white male. The secondary character was usually a white female. She was always in a subordinate position. And then if they were a little brother or sister, they were hazy and they had a tertiary role. So television, as I said earlier, the two worst things that happened to us was integration, and the other was that we let television into our home. And television, like I don't have a television. When they came up with this little box thing, and the television I have is like 25 years old. So television is out. I listen to the news, try to get the information that I need. So children should not be dealing with television, because as I said, I used to tape everything, and this executive said in an interview, this was years ago, he said every single thing you see on television is well thought out and calculated. He said there are no accidents on television. And he was dealing with product placement. That's when they first started this product placement, where the first Superman movie, Superman gets this bad guy and swings him around and throws him in a giant Coca-Cola sign on Broadway. And then the guy comes on and said, people don't know it, but that was a product placement commercial. And he said what we did was we wanted to sneak that commercial into their unconscious mind. And you have to be very, very astute in analyzing television. But it is a tremendous learning tool, and you can learn a lot about the white dominators if you know how to watch television correctly. So like I said earlier, I have this tape with the commercials geared toward children, and it's easy to trick children. So therefore, I recommend no television for children.
What are any thoughts you have on the topic of black children attending public school versus homeschool?
I prefer homeschool. Public school is what I call a social poison. That even though I might be doing a great job raising my child, when I place my child in public school, I'm placing my child into a social poison. And this is also why I oppose groups, because the people that come to the groups are toxic. They have this little whitey in them. And this is why the groups, in my estimation, are not successful. So public school, I have an article that I wrote in a book. I didn't even mention this book. It's entitled To Heal a People. It's a little anthology. There are about 4 or 5 different authors. And my wife is in there. She's a psychologist, and she has an article. Mama Marimba has an article. A couple others have articles. And my article was on the case for an educational malpractice lawsuit. And the idea was, at the time, was to use the same statistics, the dropout rate, the failure rate, the low test scores, to use the same statistics against the white dominators to say that what they're doing to African children constitutes educational malpractice. Like you would sue a lawyer for malfeasance, or you would sue a doctor for medical malpractice, we would sue the U.S. Department of Education for educational malpractice. Now, some people say you can't petition white people. The idea is to get one part of the system to fight the other part of the system. But the larger goal is to project into the universe the concept of educational malpractice. So I had a class I was teaching, an adult class, and I was talking about creating an advocacy group, meaning that we would be advocates and go to the schools with a parent to be able to speak the jargon of the schools in order to, get whatever satisfaction or to solve whatever the problem was. So as I said, parents need to go to school, check on the children, etc. So one parent went to school one day, just decided to go to the school, went to the classroom, and her little son, who was like in the second grade or so, was not in the classroom. And when she went to the classroom, the teacher saw the mother and was startled and stammered, and the mother said, well, where's my son? She said, oh, he's down the hall. The mother goes down the hall, and there are about 5 or 6 little brothers in this room, and they're all playing. And they had toys, and they were playing. And what the mother realized was that they put the little boy out of the classroom so that they didn't really have to deal with it. The boy wasn't bad, but they didn't have to deal with the boy to educate him. And now she said, oh, that's terrible. But now if we can superimpose the concept, this is educational malpractice. See, and we get that into the universe, parents will start talking, oh, this is educational malpractice. Then that concept will sweep the country. And by sweeping the country, then we are all on a page where we all have the concept. So that's my answer. No, we should not have our children in school. They mandate is supposed to be a law. I like to see the law. But the point in public education, I put it like this. This is in one of my books. Public education is free. You never get something for nothing. So you know then what you're getting with public education. And we want to keep our children out of schools and protected from the social poison and the destruction of the white teachers, the white female teachers.
Did you teach your female offspring specific things that you didn't teach your male offspring, or the other way around?
Yes. We, number one, let's see what we did. We all, in conjunction, changed our diets, et cetera. Let me see, the male offspring has a different environment to look at. The female, I don't know. I have to give that some thought, Princess Justice. I have to give that some thought. But overall, we protected them and taught them. Like when we did have television, I would come in and I would scream at the TV, this is good therapy. Oh, this, that's bogus. For example, when Susan Smith killed her children by drowning them in the car, I was watching the news. The minute it happened, the minute it came on the news, I stood up. I said, that's a lie. That woman killed those children. I knew it intuitively. So I said it to the TV. And years later, my children, when they were watching TV, they used to scream at the TV because they learned how to recognize the lies and what was bogus and what was not true. So one of the things I taught you say offspring, I understand that, but what I taught my son, S-U-N, was that as he got older, there's number one, never fight over a woman, because it's going to lead to serious problems. I taught him, never ever fight over money. If somebody owes you money and they don't pay you, just leave it alone. Those are two things. My queen daughter, similarly, there were some things, I can't remember offhand, but there was very specific things I taught them in terms of how to move through the world.
Dr. Kambon, I've heard you say that you and your wife got some land and built a house for 16 months. So you nor your wife would have to give white people any money. How did you learn and understand how to build a house, and how did you get the land to build the house?
Mm-hmm. It was on-the-job training, and one of the things that's important, even now, that I very seldom spend money on anything. Very seldom. Any money I get, I'm in a different situation now than when I was teaching. And we closed the bookstore. And any income I had we were putting it right back into the store. But I don't spend money. I don't celebrate white horror days. I don't shop. I can't tell you the last time I've been in a mall. I mean, I don't buy white stuff. Just very basic. And what's happening as the white dominators world unravels, people will have to come down to this basic level. They have taught us to buy what we want instead of just buying what we need. And that's the philosophy that we always engage in. For example, if I am home by myself, I try not to turn on the lights. I got a little flashlight. If I'm doing something, I turn on the flashlight because I don't want to export my money to the electric company, to the white dominators. So I go around, I turn lights off, turn the heat off. We do whatever we can to minimize exporting our money to the white dominators because I do not want to support them. Now, some people, I know that there's this, people ask me, they say, man, well, what are you? You a Pan-Africanist? You a black nationalist? They go down this list. No, I'm none of them. As I said, I'm not part of any group, religious, fraternal, civic, etc. But I'm a solutionary. That's what I am. I'm a solutionary and a solutionarian, that I'm looking for a solution. And you can't be looking for a solution to the problem and also be engaged in things that are unrelated to liberation. That's how I measure everything. That's the gold standard. Is going to the mall related to liberation? Is going to the concert every week, every weekend? And it's very difficult because with my understanding, I really get pissed off at the black radio stations. They don't even have news on. They just, gospel crews. Yesterday, Brother Gus, I want to just run this by you. I was getting ready to listen to this program that comes on at 9 a.m., and it was about 10 minutes to 9, so I'm going down a dial, and I come across this conservative radio program station. And the guy is saying the gold, invest in gold and silver, because the dollar has lost its value by 14% over this period of time. He said more money has been printed between the time Reagan was the president up until now than the time between Washington and Reagan. So if you understand that, more money has been printed in this short period of time than the whole time from Washington to Reagan. So he's running this thing down, extend your portfolio, et cetera, et cetera. There's a book entitled How to Prepare for the Coming Crash. Robert L. Preston came out in the 70s. He talked about all this. There's another book, The Coming Economic Earthquake, Larry Burkett, Burkett. And then there are other books dealing with that. So I'm listening to this for a few minutes. So I change it. Now I get to the black station. So I get to the black station, they're singing gospel music. I said, come on, man, what are y'all doing? So this is subtle suicide. So we just try to do, it's what I call maximum, we've reached the maximum limitation. We're all limited, being trapped in this context, but we have to do the best we can. And, that's how I roll. I do without. It's not really a sacrifice, because if you think about you sacrificing something, if you look back 5 years, you can't even remember what you sacrificed. So try not to invest in your own demise in any of the areas, cultural, economic, educational, etc. So that's my answer to that.
I watched a video aired on C-SPAN where you said 30 of your friends died in Brooklyn.
Say it again.
I watched a video aired on C-SPAN where you said 30 of your friends died in Brooklyn. Were some of those friends of yours white, and do you have any friends now that are classified as white?
No. The answer is no to both questions. And prior to that moment, that crystallizing moment, when I learned that the white dominators were trying to kill us, at that moment, I cut loose that's the only way I cut loose all contact with white people that I knew. Because I have I really don't want to call him brother, but he used to come to the store and he was talking a lot of black stuff. And this goes back to, if you go back to the right concept but unrelated, what happens is that people have the right concept but it's unrelated to black liberation. But what they do, they rationalize, they lie to themselves, and create a link to liberation through something that really is not related to liberation. I hope that I explained that. So they rationalize what they're doing and justify what they're doing and say, oh, this is leading to liberation from under white domination, but it really is not. So they are lying to themselves. So this guy, he comes to the store and he's talking all this stuff, and he creates a scenario that gives him a way and a reason not to come back. So I'm watching him, and he thinks like I don't know what's up. So I'm watching him, and he says, oh, I'm not coming back, and this and that. So, okay. But I know that he's married to a white dominator. So now he can't be talking black stuff and be married to a white dominator. It doesn't mix. There's conflict there. So he had to create this lie so that he could live with himself. I don't know how he could do that, but to justify his departure and separation from us. So I said that I can't be with them and be for liberation at the same time. It doesn't match.
I know that a lot of non-white people learn a variety of things about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I know he was a victim of racism. What things do you know that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said or did that we can use today to help replace white supremacy with justice?
What things did he say or do that could help us?
Yes, today.
Well, one of the things, I think that one of the things that he said that stands out to me is when he went to Memphis, he makes a statement. He says that I don't know what we're going to do with some of my sick white brothers. And I think that that was a pivotal statement on his part, because he came to realize, REALEYES, that he was dealing with something that was deeper than his original understanding. And so I think that's a great instruction for us. And the other thing that I learned from him is, and others, is this role of religion that has us under lockdown. There's a moment when Martin Luther King Jr. says that he was at his home and he got this vicious phone call late at night, and Coretta was in the room with at least one or two of the children. They were sleeping, and he got this vicious call. And, they said they were going to blow up his house, and he was just, it floored him. But he goes on to say that Jesus told him to proceed, to move forward. And then he says, and Jesus said, he'll never leave me. He'll never leave me. He'll never leave me. But yet he was assassinated. Malcolm said he believes in Allah, and yet he was assassinated. And I can go down the list. So the question is the real role of religion in how it relates to applied liberation. Those are two of the things that I learned from Martin Luther King, as well as watching what's going on in Egypt. They pray 5 times a day, and their prayers did not seem to relieve them from their oppression. It wasn't until they got up and went to work and got busy. And it's very fascinating that all of that took place in Liberation Square. It didn't take place in Freemasonry Square. It didn't take place in 5% Square. It didn't take place in Omega or Delta Square. And we can go down the list. It didn't take place in Christian Square. And my point is that all of that is irrelevant to liberation from under white domination. So those are the two things that I, can think of. But I greatly admire Dr. King and his courage, and I think toward the end of his life, he was assassinated because he was in the process of transformation. And there's a very famous picture of him, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., standing while Lyndon Johnson is signing the civil rights legislation. It's fascinating to me as Dr. King was there smiling over the passage of this legislation, that not too far from there, the FBI was planning his assassination. And it goes back to this idea that I spoke about earlier, that when someone knows something that you do not know, you are at a disadvantage and they are at an advantage. And the last thing I'll say about Dr. King is that he taught us through great instruction what does not work to solve the problem once and for all.
I believe that we have like 5 more minutes in the program, but I might be incorrect. I have one more question, then Gus, you can go ahead. I heard you talk about when you started becoming more informed about the system of racism, white supremacy. You said the most important question you asked yourself was why and what was going on this planet. Mm-hmm. Why were those questions the most important to you?
That's a very, very profound question. And it goes back to what I said about children going to public school. The white female teacher is the number one enemy against black children, but all children in particular. Black children specifically, but all black children. And their goal is, in part, is to crush the child's creativity and curiosity. And when when children are very young, they are always asking why. Now, I have taught on a college level at one institution for 18 years and another one for 10 years. And I have seen college students come into a classroom and sit and take notes and never ask a question. And I was the kind of professor, I would ask them, I would show them something or bring an article in. I don't just lecture. I bring articles, tapes in, videos, posters, because I like people to see things, because, you know, we are visual. And I would say, well, what do you think? And some students would say, well, you know, nobody ever asked me what I thought. You know, I just come, take notes, give the notes back on the exam, and pass the course. So this idea of why or what has been extricated, has been expunged out of us, so we don't ask questions, we just go along. And when we ask somebody about what they're doing, excuse the expression, but when we ask them about the insanity they are engaged in, they get pissed off at you for asking them why they are insane or why they're engaged in insanity behavior that's leading nowhere, that produces no results. We had a brother, great jazz aficionado. We had this little jazz society. He came in, he knew everything about all the, Thelonious Monk, Coltrane. I mean, he really knew everything. So one day he comes in, and he's laboring. He's, dragging his right foot. Before he sits down, he takes a couple of breaths. And I said, well, brother, we have this good book, African Holistic Health. And
we have about 30 seconds, I think, left.
I said, if you read this book, man, I think that you could overcome these problems, these health problems. So he got an attitude with me, and so he doesn't come back. And this is the death wish that our people have. And see, one of the problems that we have is that what we're doing